Somewhere along the way you stopped, not dramatically, not at a moment you can point to and say that is where it happened. You just stopped becoming. You became instead, became the professional, the parent, the reliable one. The person who could be counted on to play the specific role that every environment you moved through needed someone to play. And it worked. In the way that a certain kind of efficiency always works, it generated belonging, it generated approval, it generated the specific functional stability of a life that operates smoothly within its defined parameters. But somewhere in the process of becoming all of those things, the question of who you are, outside of them, without them, beneath them, stopped being asked. Carl Jung made an observation that most people in his era were not ready to hear, and that most people in every era resist in the same way. He said the vast majority of people live and die without ever becoming who they actually are, not because they fail, because they succeed at becoming what was needed instead of what was true. Stay with me, because what Jung discovered about why this happens, the specific psychological mechanism that makes the authentic self so consistently available and so consistently avoided, is the most important thing you will hear today. And by the end of this, you will understand not just why it happens, but what it would actually mean to stop letting it. Jung identified the persona. Every person constructs one. The social mask assembled in response to the specific demands of the environments you moved through. Your family, your school, your culture. Every system you needed to belong to, and that communicated through reward and withdrawal, through warmth and coldness, through the specific grammar of what was and was not acceptable, which version of yourself was welcome. Most people think the persona is something they put on occasionally, for social situations, for professional contexts, for the specific performances that adult life requires. Jung said something more disturbing than that. He said for most people, the persona is not something they wear. It is something they became so thoroughly, over such a long time, with such consistent reinforcement from the environments that needed it, that the distinction between the mask and the face collapsed, and the person living inside the persona forgot. Not that they were wearing it, that there was a face underneath. Here is how this actually happens, and I want you to hear this not as a story about other people, but as a description of something that has been happening in your own life since before you were old enough to understand what was being built. You arrived with a self, not fully formed, not independent of the world that would shape it, but specific, particular, with the raw material of genuine preferences and genuine responses, and the beginning of a genuine orientation toward existence. And then the world began its work, not maliciously, not with the intention of replacing that self with something more convenient, just functionally, the way every environment has always functioned. By communicating in the specific language of belonging and exclusion, which aspects of the self that arrived were compatible with membership, and which were not, the parts that fit, the qualities that generated warmth, the expressions of who you were that produced the specific response of being wanted and included and valued. Those parts were developed, reinforced, rewarded, made central to the identity. The parts that did not fit, the qualities that produced discomfort or distance, or the specific withdrawal of warmth that every developing human interprets as a threat to survival, those parts were suppressed. Not in a single decision, in 10,000 small adjustments made below the level of conscious choice. A gradual editing of the self toward what was acceptable, away from what was true. Jung said the tragedy is not the editing itself. Some editing is necessary. Social life requires adaptation. The complete absence of adjustment to context would not be authenticity. It would be chaos. The tragedy is what happens when the editing is never examined. When the constructed self is never held up against the original and asked, is this still what I actually am? Or is this what I learned to be? And the reason this examination almost never happens is the reason most people never become themselves. Jung called it the comfort of the familiar, the specific psychological relief of a self that knows how to function. That has proven its ability to generate belonging, that has years of evidence supporting its effectiveness at navigating the world. Questioning it requires something that every well-established system of functioning resists: the possibility of being wrong about who you are, of having invested in a version of yourself that was built around what was wanted, and of discovering that what you are when that scaffolding is removed is something you do not yet know how to be. Here is the specific mechanism Jung identified, and this is the part that explains why people who sincerely want to be themselves consistently do not become themselves. He called it the ego's protection of the persona. The ego, the center of conscious identity, does not just inhabit the persona, it defends it, because the persona is not just a social mask. It is the ego's primary evidence for its own existence. When you take away the roles, the achievements, the identities you have built and inhabited, the ego experiences this not as liberation, as dissolution, as the specific terror of a self that does not know who it is when the performance stops. And so the ego generates, with extraordinary consistency and creativity, reasons why the examination is not necessary, not safe, not the right time, not compatible with the responsibilities that currently require your functioning version of yourself to remain stable and available. The person who is almost ready to ask the real questions about who they are gets very busy, takes on a new project, gets more invested in the external structure, finds the specific form of forward momentum that keeps the interior examination at a comfortable distance. Not because they are shallow, because the ego is doing exactly what it was built to do, protecting the structure of the self from the specific disruption of genuine becoming. But here is the turn. Jung said the self, the actual self, what he called the self with a capital S, the totality of who you are beneath the persona and the ego's management of it, does not accept permanent suppression. It has a drive toward expression, toward emergence, toward the specific experience of being lived rather than performed. And when that drive is consistently redirected by the ego's protection of the persona, it finds other ways to communicate through the recurring sense of meaninglessness that arrives not in the midst of failure, but in the midst of success, through the specific restlessness of a person who has everything they were supposed to want and cannot account for why it does not feel like enough, through the creativity that has been waiting for a decade to be given permission, through the relationships that keep feeling insufficient in ways that cannot be attributed to the other person, through the dreams that are more alive and more strange and more genuinely expressive than anything the waking life is currently containing. The self does not stop trying, but most people interpret its communications as symptoms of something wrong, rather than as evidence of something trying to be right. Jung identified the specific reason most people never respond to these communications, the reason they stay in the persona even when it is clearly costing them more than they can afford. He called it the fear of the interior, the specific and often unarticulated terror of a person who has spent so long looking outward that turning inward feels like approaching an unknown territory with no guarantee of what is there. Most people do not resist self-discovery because they prefer being inauthentic. They resist it because the authentic self is genuinely unknown to them. They have been performing the persona for so long, and the shadow, everything the persona suppressed, has been underground for so long, that the actual self, the one that exists in the integration of what was performed and what was buried, is something they have never encountered, and the specific discomfort of not knowing who you will find, of having no guarantee that what emerges will be as functional as what exists, keeps most people in the performance indefinitely.
Here is what Jung found in the people who did not stay, who went into the interior despite the ego's resistance and the discomfort of genuine uncertainty and the specific social pressure of environments that preferred the performance. He found something that he returned to across his entire career as the most significant psychological transformation he had ever witnessed. He found people who became available to their own lives in a way that the persona never allowed. Not more successful necessarily, not more admired or more socially effective or more efficient at the functional navigation of their external circumstances, but present, genuinely, undeniably, irreducibly present, in the specific way that is only possible when the energy that was going into the performance is redirected toward the actual experience of being alive. When the management stops, when the construction of the acceptable self ceases to be the primary project, when the question of what is true becomes more important than the question of what is functional. He found people who had finally stopped living lives that were designed for audiences they could no longer remember agreeing to perform for, and had started living lives that were organized around something they could not have accessed from inside the persona, their own genuine truth about what existence is for, what theirs specifically is for, not in the grand abstract sense, in the daily, particular, ordinary sense of a person who has learned to recognize the difference between what they actually feel and what the persona performs, between what they actually want and what the constructed self learned to want, between who they actually are and who they were built to appear to be, Jung said something I want to stay with for a moment. He said that the most terrifying thing a human being can do is to accept themselves completely, not the curated version, not the successful version, not the version that has been refined through decades of editing toward what was acceptable. Completely. With the rage and the grief and the desires that were buried and the qualities that were suppressed and the specific authentic orientation toward existence that was shaped by something prior to every environment that later shaped it. He said this is terrifying because it requires the death of the persona, not the persona as a social function, the persona as an identity, the belief that you are the performance, that the mask and the face are the same thing, that the constructed self and the actual self are identical. That one is the only thing available. And the death of that belief, however necessary, however liberating on the other side, is experienced in the moment of its dying as exactly what it is. The loss of the only version of yourself you have consistently known. Most people choose not to die that death, not because they are cowardly, because nobody prepared them for what would be on the other side.
Because the framework they were given for understanding their own development did not include the specific possibility that the self they had constructed was a starting point rather than a destination. Because the world they moved through rewarded the performance so consistently and so thoroughly that the performance became indistinguishable from the truth. And because stopping, really stopping, asking the question that the construction was designed to keep at a comfortable distance, who am I when I am not what I was built to be? That question requires a quality of courage that has nothing in common with the courage required to build. It is the specific courage of someone who is willing to not know, who is willing to be genuinely uncertain, who is willing to stand in the space between the persona that is dissolving and the self that has not yet consolidated, without rushing toward any available identity to fill the gap. That specific patience with genuine uncertainty is what individuation requires, and most people never find it because the world never told them it was the most important thing they could develop. If you have been feeling the question that this video was built around, the one about who you are when none of the roles are required, when nobody needs anything, when the performance stops and you are simply here, in your own life, without an audience to perform it for, that question is not a symptom of something wrong. It is the most alive thing about you. It is the self that was never fully able to be expressed inside the persona, pressing against the surface, looking for the specific moment when you finally decide that what is true is more important than what is functional, that what is real is more important than what is acceptable, that the person underneath everything you were built to be is worth the specific terrifying gift of finally being met. Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Most people never arrive there, not because the journey is impossible, because nobody told them the journey had not yet begun. Now you know. The question is what you do with that knowledge. If something in this reached the part of you that has been living someone else's version of your life, while knowing, quietly and persistently, that there is another one available, that knowing is not a crisis. It is an invitation, the most important one you will ever receive. Share this with the person who seems to have everything and still feels like something essential is missing. They need to hear that the missing is not the absence of something outside. It is the presence of something inside that has not yet been allowed to exist. And subscribe, because what comes next is for the person who is finally ready to answer the only question that has ever actually mattered.